I pressed send on the photograph my 11-year-old daughter had asked me to share 2 days after her kidney transplant. Mom replied, "She survived. What else do you expect us to do?" My brother added, "Not tonight. We're accepting Family of the Year." My daughter turned the phone face down and whispered, "Did I ask for too much?" Then the 9 o'clock award introduction arrived. One sentence praised a family that always shows up. I knew those words because I had written them. By 9, they would be the words the presenter could not finish. Stay with us as one mother learns that love cannot be rescued by rewriting absence. The screen stayed bright between us, its light stretching across the white hospital blanket. My daughter kept her hand on the phone as if she were afraid it might turn itself over and show her the messages again. Her face was still pale from surgery. She had smiled for the photograph because she wanted Mom and my brother to see that she was awake. She had lifted 2 fingers in a small victory sign, though the movement pulled at something beneath the blanket and made her wince. "Maybe use the one where I don't look sleepy," she had said. I had taken 3. In the first, her eyes were half closed. In the second, she tried too hard to smile. In the third, she looked tired but unmistakably herself. "Are you sure you want me to send it?" I had asked. She nodded. "They'll want to know I'm okay." I had wanted to believe that too. Now, the photograph sat above Mom's reply in the family chat. Beneath it was my brother's message, sent less than a minute later. Neither of them had asked whether she was in pain. Neither had asked if the kidney was working or whether she had slept. No one had called her. My daughter's fingers curled into the blanket. I had spent years preparing soft explanations for moments like this. Mom was practical. My brother showed love by doing things, not by talking. Hospitals made some people uncomfortable. They had helped before. They cared, even when they did not know how to show it. Every one of those sentences rose automatically. I swallowed all of them. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. Her eyes moved toward me without her head turning. "Then why don't they want to talk to me?" The monitor beside her bed continued its steady rhythm. Somewhere beyond the closed door, a cart rolled along the corridor. I searched for an answer that would not ask her to doubt what had just happened. "I don't know why they made that choice," I said. But sending the picture wasn't asking too much. She studied my face, as if she were waiting for the rest of the explanation. When none came, she looked away. That silence felt different from all the others I had filled for her. My phone vibrated again. I expected another message from the family chat. Perhaps Mom realizing how cold she had sounded, or my brother sending one of his awkward jokes to repair the damage without admitting he had caused it. Instead, an email notification appeared across the top of the screen. "Final program review requested. Riverton Community Foundation." My daughter saw the name before I could angle the phone away. "That's their award thing?" "Yes." "Are you going?" "No." I moved closer and adjusted the edge of her blanket where it had slipped from her shoulder. "I'm staying here." She gave a small nod, but there was no relief in it. Staying with her should not have been remarkable. It should not have needed to be promised. "Can you turn the phone over?" she asked. I placed it face down on the narrow shelf beneath the window. A nurse stepped in a moment later, scanned my daughter's wristband, and asked her to rate her pain. She held up 4 fingers instead of speaking. The nurse adjusted the medication line, checked the chart at the foot of the bed, and reminded her that resting was part of getting stronger. My daughter closed her eyes before the nurse had finished. I waited until her breathing settled, then picked up my phone again. The email contained the public livestream link for that evening and a document titled Final Introduction Copy. A short note asked that any corrections be returned before noon. Near the bottom was a reminder that the program still required review from the person connected to the original submission. I read that line twice, then opened the attachment. The first paragraph listed Mom's years at the church pantry. The second praised my brother's charity drives and the meal train he had once organized when my daughter's dialysis schedule had overwhelmed me. Those things had happened. That was what made the next paragraph harder to read. It described a family whose public service reflected the way they treated one another at home. It said hardship had strengthened their devotion. It praised people who always showed up when one of them needed help most. The wording tightened around my chest. Always showed up. I had used that phrase before. Not that morning. Not in the family chat. Months earlier, during a time when Mom had driven my daughter to 2 scheduled dialysis sessions because I could not leave work, and my brother had spent an entire Sunday arranging meals after I admitted I was falling behind. They had helped, and I had been grateful. Somewhere between gratitude and fear, I had turned those moments into something larger. I had taken a few days when they came through and treated them like proof of who they would always be. My daughter shifted against the pillow. I locked the screen. For 2 nights, I had slept in scraps, waking whenever she moved or a machine changed its sound. My thoughts should have been slow. Instead, details began lining themselves up with the cruel efficiency of a schedule. The photograph. Mom's reply. My brother choosing a ceremony over a call to his niece. The phrase in the program. The noon deadline. The live stream beginning at 9. My daughter opened her eyes again. Did they say anything else? I looked toward the phone lying beside my hand. No, I said. It was the plain truth. For once, I did not attach an excuse to it. She nodded and closed her eyes again. I watched her until her breathing deepened. Then I opened my email, searched 6 months back, and found the document I had not looked at since the day I sent it. The file name appeared beneath my thumb. I tapped it. The document opened to a page I had not seen in 6 months. At the top was the Riverton Community Foundation logo. Beneath it, in a box marked Nominator Information, was my name. For several seconds, I stared at it as if someone else had typed it there. I had submitted the nomination from my kitchen table after midnight. My daughter had been asleep on the couch because her legs ached too much for her to climb the stairs. I remembered balancing my work laptop beside a stack of medication receipts, convinced I was recording the best parts of my family before fear made me forget them. Now every sentence looked different. The first one said that my family never allowed my daughter to face her illness alone. The second said that whenever one of us entered a crisis, everyone showed up. The third said they had taught my daughter that family meant being present, especially when presence was inconvenient. I read that last sentence twice. 6 months earlier, it had sounded honest. That winter, my supervisor had refused another last-minute absence after I had already used most of my leave for appointments. My daughter had 2 scheduled hemodialysis sessions that week, and I had sat in the parking lot outside work with my forehead against the steering wheel, trying to decide whether losing my job would be worse than missing treatment. Mom had answered on the 3rd ring. I can take her, she had said. Send me the time and the address. She had driven my daughter to the dialysis center twice that week. She brought a paperback for the waiting room, packed crackers my daughter liked, and complained only once about the parking garage. At the time, I had been so grateful that the relief had felt like proof. The second memory came from a month later. I had admitted to my brother that I had been feeding my daughter cereal for dinner because I could not keep up with work, appointments, laundry, and sleep. By the next evening, he had created an online meal schedule, called 3 relatives, and arranged 2 weeks of dinners. He had handled it with the same efficient voice he used at work. People want to help, he told me. You just have to give them a task. For 2 weeks, containers appeared on our porch with names and heating instructions taped to the lids. My brother had delivered one himself, placed it in my refrigerator, and left before I could thank him properly. Those things had happened. Mom had driven my daughter. My brother had organized meals. They had helped when I could not manage alone. But I had taken those separate acts and turned them into a permanent truth. I had written always when the facts only supported sometimes. I had written never alone when I could name birthdays, appointments, and hospital days, when my daughter had looked toward a doorway that remained empty. I scrolled farther. The application asked for dates, locations, and examples. I had listed the dialysis sessions. I had listed the meal train. I had included Mom's years volunteering at the church pantry and my brother's winter charity drives. I remembered calling each of them casually before I submitted the form. "What week did you take her to dialysis?" I had asked Mom. "Why?" "I'm organizing some medical records." She gave me the dates without another question. I had asked my brother when he started the meal schedule and how many families his last charity drive had served. He had laughed and accused me of finally taking an interest in his spreadsheets. At the bottom of the application, I had written that I wanted the nomination to remain confidential until the ceremony. I told myself it would make the award more meaningful. The truth was less generous. I wanted to surprise them with evidence that the family I depended on was real. My daughter moved in the bed, and I closed the document halfway. Her eyes stayed shut. One hand rested beside the pulse monitor clipped to her finger. The tape around her fore had begun to lift at one corner, and I pressed it down carefully without waking her. 2 days earlier, I had stood beside her bed while the transplant team wheeled her toward surgery. Mom had texted that she was praying. My brother had sent a thumbs-up symbol and said he had a meeting he could not move. I had accepted both messages as care. I had told my daughter they were thinking of her. They had known the surgery date. They knew she was still in the hospital. The civic hall was less than half an hour away, and the ceremony did not begin until evening. Neither of them had called her. I opened the current introduction again. The award language was built from my nomination, polished into shorter, brighter sentences for the stage. My private exaggerations had become public declarations. I selected the sentence about my daughter facing illness alone and deleted it from the correction box. Then I removed the reference to the transplant. I removed her age. I removed the phrase about every crisis bringing us together. The cursor blinked beside the final sentence. Family means being present, especially when presence is inconvenient. I highlighted it, but my finger stopped above the delete key. My daughter had lost her father when she was 5. After that, I had treated every family gathering like proof that she still belonged to something larger than the two of us. When Mom attended a school program, I photographed her in the audience. When my brother remembered a birthday, I repeated his message twice. When they missed something, I supplied reasons before my daughter could form conclusions of her own. They were tired. They were busy. They did not understand hospitals. They loved her in their own way. I had believed I was protecting her from rejection. Looking at the nomination, I wondered whether I had been protecting myself from naming it. I deleted the sentence. The email from the foundation included the program manager's direct number. I carried my phone into the small family alcove outside the room, leaving the door partly open so I could see the foot of my daughter's bed. The program manager answered with her name and the measured tone of someone already managing a crowded day. I identified myself, then lowered my voice. I received the final introduction. There are details that need to be removed. She asked for the nomination reference number. I read it from the document. There was a pause while she opened the file. "You are the original nominator," she said. "Yes. And you requested confidentiality through the presentation." "Yes." The word sounded heavier the second time. She explained that my identity remained protected from the recipients until the introduction segment. The foundation had shared only the public program information with my family. They knew someone had nominated them, but not who. "Do you want to end the confidentiality?" she asked. "No." The answer came too quickly. Through the narrow opening in the door, I saw my daughter shift beneath the blanket. "I only need the introduction corrected," I said. "What would you like removed?" "Anything about my daughter's transplant. Her name, her age, her medical history, all of it." "That can be done." "And the statement saying the family always appears during a crisis." The program manager stopped typing. I continued before she could respond. "The pantry work is accurate. The charity drives are accurate. The meal schedule happened. My mother did take my daughter to dialysis when I couldn't leave work. I'm not disputing those things. But you are disputing the family description." I'm saying it is too broad. Another pause followed. I could hear a keyboard in the background. The program manager asked me to open the final attestation page attached to the email. I found it beneath the introduction. It asked the nominator to confirm that the essential claims in the submission remained accurate on the day of the award. I read the first paragraph but did not scroll farther. "We need that completed today," she said. "For now, let's separate ordinary program edits from changes to the basis of the nomination. I'm not trying to cancel anything. I understand. I'm asking what kind of change you are making." I looked back into the room. My daughter was awake again, staring toward the window. The phone remained face down on the shelf where I had placed it. 6 months earlier, I had taken moments of help and made them into a promise. That morning, the promise had answered my daughter in 2 sentences. She survived. Not tonight. I tightened my hand around the phone. "I want her removed from the introduction," I said. "I want the transplant removed, and I want the absolute statements corrected." The program manager's voice remained calm. "If those statements were only phrased too strongly, we can review revised wording. If you are telling me they are no longer accurate, that is not a copy edit." I watched my daughter lift one hand and touch the edge of the blanket, checking for the phone without turning her head. I was not ready for my family to know who had nominated them. I was even less ready for my daughter to know. So I chose the smallest version of the truth I thought I could still control. "I'm asking for corrections," I said, "not a withdrawal." The program manager did not answer immediately. I could hear the faint tapping of her keyboard while I stood in the family alcove, watching the open doorway to my daughter's room. "Let me make sure I understand," she said. "You are confirming the documented activities, but you want 3 statements about the family's conduct removed." "Yes. And you are not withdrawing the nomination?" "No." The word came out firmer than I felt. She asked me to identify the exact claims I could no longer support. I opened the document again and read them silently before answering. They never allowed my daughter to face illness alone. Everyone showed up when one of us entered a crisis. They had taught her that family meant being present when presence was inconvenient. "All 3, I said. The tapping stopped. "If we remove those statements, the review committee may need to determine whether the remaining material still supports the category," she said. "I'm not asking you to decide that right now. I understand. But these are not decorative lines. They explain why the community work was presented as evidence of the family's character." I looked through the doorway. My daughter had turned slightly toward the wall, one hand tucked beneath her cheek. "The community work happened," I said. "I'm not denying it. But the interpretation has changed." I closed my eyes. The interpretation was too broad when I wrote it. That was the closest I had come to saying the truth aloud. The program manager asked me to submit the corrections through the secure link so there would be a record of exactly what I disputed. She did not explain every step that would follow. She only warned me that once the requested changes affected the basis of the nomination, the Foundation could not treat them as private copy edits. "What does that mean for my confidentiality?" I asked. "Your name remains protected under the current request, but the recipients may be told that the nomination is under review." My grip tightened around the phone. "Do they have to be told today?" "The ceremony is tonight." I knew that. The clock above the nurse's station read 11:43. "I need a few minutes," I said. "I can keep the correction link open, but I cannot promise the original introduction will remain in the program if you have formally challenged its accuracy." After the call ended, I stayed in the alcove with the phone pressed against my palm. I had wanted to remove my daughter from a false story without disturbing anything around it. I had imagined deleting a few sentences as quietly as pulling damaged stitches from fabric. Instead, each correction exposed how much of the nomination depended on the meaning I had given those facts. Mom's pantry work was real. My brother's charity drives were real. The meals, the dialysis rides, the grocery bags left on my porch were real. But the award was not called Volunteer of the Year. It was called Family of the Year. I returned to the room. My daughter opened her eyes when I sat beside her. Was that about the ceremony? She asked. Yes. Are they making you watch it? No. She frowned. Then why do they keep calling? They needed to fix something in the program. What? I adjusted the cup on her bedside table, even though it was already within reach. Some information about you shouldn't be in it. She watched my hand. Did Grandma put my transplant in there? No. The answer was true, but it did not feel clean. She waited, perhaps expecting me to say more. When I did not, she turned her attention to the window. The sky beyond the glass was colorless, and the reflection showed the two of us without showing what stood between us. A nurse came in to check her temperature and ask whether she felt nauseated. My daughter shook her head. When the nurse asked if she wanted to sit up for a few minutes, she agreed, then clenched her jaw as the bed rose behind her. I supported her shoulder without pulling. You can stop, I said. I'm okay. You don't have to prove that. Her eyes flicked toward me. For a moment, I wondered whether she heard the difference between what I had said and what Mom had written. She survived. What else do you expect us to do? The nurse helped arrange the pillows and reminded my daughter to breathe slowly. Once she was settled, I opened the correction link. The form displayed the 3 disputed statements in separate boxes. For the first, I selected inaccurate. For the second, I selected cannot confirm. For the third, my finger hovered. Family meant being present when presence was inconvenient. My daughter had been inconvenient for years. Dialysis happened before workdays ended. Medication alarms interrupted meals. Emergency calls came during meetings, holidays, and sleep. Every person who loved her had been asked to give something they had not planned to give. Sometimes Mom had done it. Sometimes my brother had. That inconsistency was exactly what I had refused to name. I selected cannot confirm. A final box asked whether the remaining nomination could proceed with revised wording. I typed that the documented community activities remained accurate and that references to my daughter's medical history, transplant, age, and personal experiences must be removed. I did not say the award should be canceled. I did not say my family deserved it. I pressed submit. A confirmation number appeared. Less than 10 minutes later, the program manager emailed that the file had been moved to content review. There was no accusation in the message. No moral judgment, only one sentence that made my stomach drop. The recipients have been notified that material elements of the nomination are being reviewed before tonight's presentation. My phone vibrated almost at once. The family chat had been quiet since my brother's message about the award. Now Mom had posted a photograph of the dress she planned to wear, laid across her bed beside a pair of silver shoes. Beneath it, she wrote that the foundation had contacted them about a problem with the program. My brother replied before anyone else. Probably a formatting issue. I'll handle it. A minute later, he sent another message. Did anyone give them updated medical information? I looked at my daughter. Her eyes were closed again, but her breathing was too shallow for sleep. Mom answered that she had not spoken to anyone from the foundation. My brother asked whether the hospital had contacted them. Mom wrote that the hospital would have no reason to interfere with a community award. Then my brother called me. I declined the call. He called again. I turned the phone to silent and placed it inside my bag. My daughter opened her eyes. You can answer it, she said. It can wait. Is it Uncle? I nodded. Her gaze moved to the bag. He didn't call me. There was no accusation in her voice. That made it worse. No, I said. The phone vibrated against the fabric. Once, twice. Then it stopped. A notification appeared from the family chat. I could see only the first few words across the locked screen. Someone is changing the nomination. I did not open it. For the next hour, I focused on the things directly in front of me. I helped my daughter sip water. I held the basin when the medication made her stomach turn. I counted with her, while she took slow breaths through the pain. When she became tired, I lowered the bed and tucked the blanket around her legs. The phone remained inside the bag. At 1:15, the transplant coordinator came in with an update. The new kidney was beginning to work as expected. My daughter would still need close monitoring, but the numbers were moving in the right direction. My daughter smiled for the first time since the photograph. "Can I tell Grandma?" she asked. The question struck so quickly that I could not hide my reaction. Her smile faded. "You don't have to," she said. I sat beside her and took her hand carefully. "You should never have to wonder whether good news is worth sharing." "Then can we tell her?" I looked toward the bag. "Yes," I said. "We can tell her." I opened the family chat and typed that the transplant team was encouraged by the latest results. Mom responded with a heart symbol. My brother did not react to the update. Instead, 3 messages from him waited beneath it. "The foundation says someone challenged the family description. They won't tell us who submitted the nomination. Only someone close to us would know which details to question." I read the final message twice. "Someone is trying to take this from us." My daughter shifted beside me. "Did they say they're happy?" I locked the screen before she could see it. "Grandma sent a heart," I said. It was true. It was also the smallest possible answer. Across town, my family was no longer thinking about the girl whose body was learning to accept a new kidney. They were searching for the person who had disturbed their award. And for the first time, I understood that every correction I made brought them one step closer to me. My brother called again before the transplant coordinator left the room. I watched his name appear across the screen while the coordinator explained the next blood draw and the medication schedule. I turned the phone face down on my knee. My daughter noticed. "You can answer him," she said. "He can leave a message." The coordinator glanced between us but did not ask. She finished reviewing the numbers, reminded my daughter that the first days after transplant could change hour by hour, and promised to return after the next lab results. As soon as the door closed, my phone vibrated again. This time it was Mom. He let it ring. My daughter shifted against the pillows. "Are they mad about the award?" "I don't know." It was another answer without an excuse, but I still hated how carefully I had chosen it. Mom left a voicemail. My brother sent a message 2 seconds later. "We need to talk before you create a bigger problem." He had not asked whether my daughter was awake. He had not responded to the transplant update. The only problem he could see was the one attached to his name in an award program. I stood and carried the phone into the alcove. The corridor was busier now. A housekeeper moved past with a cart of folded linens. 2 nurses spoke quietly beside a computer station. Through the open doorway, I could still see my daughter's bed. I called my brother. He answered before the first ring finished. "Did you contact the foundation?" There was no greeting. "Yes." The word landed between us. For a moment, he said nothing. Then his voice lowered. "How did you even know there was a nomination?" I looked through the doorway. My daughter had closed her eyes, but I could not tell whether she was sleeping. "I received information about the program." "That doesn't answer me." "I asked them to remove her transplant and her medical history." "Why?" I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in the question. "Because she is 11 years old. Because she is in a hospital bed. Because neither of you asked permission to have her medical history read in front of a ballroom. We didn't submit anything about her." "I know." The silence that followed felt dangerous. My brother recovered first. "Then who did?" "I'm not discussing that. You don't get to call the foundation, challenge our award, and then refuse to explain yourself." I challenged statements about my daughter. "You challenged the family description." His precision made me grip the phone harder. "They told you that?" "They told us material claims were being reviewed. Then they asked whether we could verify some of the family support described in the nomination." "And what did you say?" I said the support happened. He began listing it before I could respond. Mom had driven my daughter to dialysis. He had arranged the meal schedule. He had delivered groceries when I could not leave the house. Mom had sat with my daughter during one emergency admission. He had covered my utility bill once without telling anyone. The family had volunteered together. They had helped raise money for the pantry's new refrigerator. None of it was false. That was what made his anger sound almost reasonable. You called me crying because you were afraid you'd lose your job, he said. Mom stepped in. You told me you hadn't cooked in days and I fixed it. We have shown up for you. Sometimes. The word left my mouth before I could soften it. My brother stopped. What is that supposed to mean? It means those things happened. It also means my daughter sent you a photograph 2 days after a transplant, and you told her you were too busy accepting an award about being a good family. I didn't tell her I was too busy being a good family. You wrote, "Not tonight. We're accepting Family of the Year." Because we are. Or we were. Before someone started rewriting the nomination at the last minute. She asked if she had expected too much. He exhaled sharply. She is recovering from major surgery. She is emotional. You should not be dragging her into this. The cruelty of that sentence was quieter than the earlier ones. It came wrapped in concern. I didn't drag her anywhere, I said. She sent a picture. You answered her. And you are interpreting one text as if it erases years. Before I could reply, another voice came through his phone. Mom. He had me on speaker. I want to say something, she said. I stepped farther into the alcove and lowered my voice. Is anyone else listening? No, my brother said. Just us. Mom began in the tired, controlled tone she used when she believed she was the only adult in a room. I know my message sounded blunt. It didn't sound blunt. It sounded cruel. I said she survived, because that is what matters. What mattered to her was hearing that you were glad. I am glad. Then why didn't you call her? Mom hesitated. We have been preparing for tonight for weeks. Your brother has people coming from work. I have people from the pantry coming. The foundation changed the seating twice. I still have to pick up the program cards. I stared at the hospital wall. None of those things prevented a 2-minute call. Mom continued. You were with her. The doctors were with her. She was not alone. My eyes moved toward the room. My daughter lay beneath a warmed blanket with an IV in one arm and a fresh incision hidden beneath the gown. The fact that I was there had become my family's permission not to be. She knew you chose the ceremony, I said. No, she knew we had a commitment. She is your commitment too. My brother interrupted. This is exactly the problem. You are taking one evening and using it to define all of us. One evening can still tell the truth, not the whole truth. He was right about that. One evening did not erase the dialysis rides. It did not erase the meals. It did not erase the night Mom had sat in a plastic chair beside my daughter while I drove home to shower and change clothes. But those acts did not erase this either. My family kept treating care like money in an account. Every favor was a deposit. Every absence was a withdrawal they believed they had already covered. Mom's voice softened. You were grateful when I helped before. I still am. Then why are you doing this? Because gratitude is not the same as confirming something that isn't true. What exactly isn't true? I looked at the open doorway again. My daughter's eyes were open. She was watching the ceiling. Not me, but I could not know how much she heard. I moved farther down the corridor. The nomination says this family never leaves one of its own alone in a crisis. My brother answered immediately. She wasn't alone. That is not the same thing as all of you showing up. We cannot all be physically present every time something happens. No one asked for all of you every time. What did you expect tonight? Mom asked. For us to cancel the ceremony and sit in the hospital while she slept. I expected one call that was about her instead of the award. The line went quiet. For a few seconds, I heard only the faint background noise from my brother's side. A door closed. Fabric rustled. Mom might have been standing beside the dress she had photographed. Then my brother spoke. What do you want? It was the first useful question anyone had asked. I want every reference to her removed. That's already being handled. Her name, her age, the transplant, the dialysis, any description of how she supposedly experienced this family. Fine. His agreement came too quickly. And the statements that say everyone always appears during a crisis? That is different. Why? Because now you are changing the character of the nomination. The wording changes the character, not me. Mom spoke again. The pantry work is real. Your brother's fundraising is real. The meals were real. The rides were real. You are acting as though none of it counts. I said it counts. Then let the ceremony happen. There it was. The bargain they wanted. They would surrender my daughter's name if I left the family image intact. My brother's tone became practical. Take her medical details out. I agree with that. The foundation can focus on the community work and the way we supported each other over the years. No one has to mention the transplant tonight. I pictured the ballroom at 9, their names on the program, the applause beginning before the introduction ended. My daughter would not be used as the centerpiece. At first, that sounded like enough. Send me the revised language before I agree to anything, I said. My brother let out a breath. Good. That is reasonable. I didn't say I agreed, just read it without being angry. I ended the call before he could say more. When I returned to the room, my daughter was pretending to sleep. I sat beside her and waited. After a minute, she opened her eyes. Was Grandma upset? She's worried about the ceremony. That's why you were talking quietly? Yes. She looked toward my bag. Are they still going? As far as I know. Her mouth tightened, but she did not ask another question. I wanted to tell her that they had helped before. I wanted to explain why I had once believed those moments meant something permanent. The familiar words gathered behind my teeth. They care. They are complicated. One bad night does not erase everything. I said none of them. A new email arrived 20 minutes later. Revised introduction copy. The references to my daughter were gone. No transplant. No dialysis. No 11-year-old child whose survival had become a paragraph in someone else's celebration. The first section praised Mom's work at the pantry. The second described my brother's charity drives. A final paragraph connected those efforts to the family's private values. I read it once, then again. The sentence about always appearing during a crisis had been removed. In its place was something shorter. They are a family that never turns its back on its own. My daughter shifted beside me. I lowered the phone. I had achieved exactly what I had asked for. Her name was gone. Her illness was gone. Her photograph would not appear, but the lie was still there. It had simply learned how to survive without mentioning her. I read the revised sentence again. They are a family that never turns its back on its own. The words sat beneath Mom's pantry work and my brother's charity drives, as though those public acts proved something private. My daughter's name was gone. Her transplant was gone. Her photograph would not appear at the ceremony. Everything I had asked them to remove had been removed, and I still could not approve it. The foundation's email included 2 buttons beneath the revised introduction. Confirm revised copy. Request further review. My thumb rested over the first one. If I confirmed it, my daughter's medical history would remain private. My family would receive the award. No one would learn that I had written the nomination. Mom and my brother might complain about the delay, but by 9 o'clock they would be smiling beneath the lights at Civic Hall. I could tell myself I had protected the only person who mattered. I could also tell myself that the final sentence was merely ceremonial language. Never turns its back on its own. My daughter lay less than 3 feet from me, because the people described by those words had chosen not to call her. I pressed Request Further Review. A text box opened. I typed that removing my daughter's details did not correct the remaining claim. The documented community service could stand on its own, but I could not confirm that it demonstrated how the family treated one another privately. I read the sentence once. Then I submitted it. The confirmation appeared at 2:26. At 2:31, my brother called. I watched his name flash across the screen. My daughter was awake, tracing a faint pattern in the blanket with one finger. She looked at the phone, then at me. You should answer, she said. I can call him back. He keeps calling. The phone stopped, then started again almost immediately. I carried it toward the doorway. "Stay where I can see you," my daughter said. The request was quiet. I remained beside the window instead. When I answered, my brother did not speak at first. I heard a car door close on his side, followed by the muffled rush of traffic. "You asked Mom for the dates of the dialysis appointments," he said. My body went still. "What?" "6 months ago. You called her and asked for the exact week she drove to the center." I looked toward my daughter. Her eyes had returned to the blanket, but the room was too quiet for privacy. "I told you why I needed them. You said you were organizing medical records." "I was organizing records. You also asked me when I started the meal schedule." I moved closer to the door, but my daughter lifted her head. "Don't go out there," she said. "I'm right here." My brother heard her. "Is she listening?" I lowered the volume. "What do you want?" "The foundation sent us the second revision." My pulse quickened. "They should not have sent you my comments." "They didn't. They sent the new introduction and said the nominator still would not verify the family description." He paused. "You knew exactly which claims were being reviewed. You knew her medical details had been included before we did. You knew the wording of the nomination." I did not answer. He continued more slowly. "You are the nominator." My daughter's hand stopped moving. The room seemed to narrow around us. My brother said my name. "Tell me I'm wrong." I looked at my daughter. Her face had changed. Not with shock yet, with attention. She was listening now. "I'm not discussing this with you while she is here." His voice sharpened. "That means I'm right. Call me later." "No. You nominated us, and now you are trying to take it back because you are angry about one text." "I am trying to correct what I wrote." "You wrote the truth." "I wrote what I believed." "What changed besides today?" My daughter's eyes met mine. The question hung in the room. What changed besides today? I could have ended the call. I could have told my brother that my daughter needed rest. I could have stepped into the corridor, despite her asking me to stay. Instead, I remained beside her bed, with the phone in my hand, and every exit suddenly closed. My brother kept speaking. "You asked for dates. You asked for numbers from the charity drive. You asked how many meals I arranged. You knew everything because you wrote it." My daughter pushed herself slightly higher against the pillows. The movement made her wince. "Mom?" I ended the call. My brother called back before the screen went dark. I silenced it. My daughter stared at me. "You wrote the award thing?" Her voice was thin from medication and fatigue, but the question was clear. I placed the phone on the shelf. "Yes." She waited. I wanted to reach for her hand. I did not know whether I still had the right. "When?" "About 6 months ago." "Before they knew I was getting the kidney?" "Yes." Her brow tightened. "You wrote that they always came?" I sat slowly. "I wrote that they helped us when things were hard." "That isn't what I asked." "No." The monitor beside her continued its steady rhythm. I forced myself to answer the question she had actually asked. "Yes, I wrote that they always showed up." She looked toward the window. "Why?" "Because Mom had driven her to dialysis. Because my brother had organized meals. Because I had been terrified that if I looked too closely at the gaps between those moments, I would see how small our family had become. Because after her father died, I had promised myself she would never feel that the two of us were all she had left. Because I wanted one document to make my hope feel official. I chose the simplest truth first. I thought they would be here when it mattered most." Her eyes returned to me. "They weren't here before." The words were not angry. That made them harder to hear. "Sometimes they were." "Sometimes?" She repeated the word I had used with my brother. I nodded. She studied my face, searching for the explanation I had always supplied. I felt it forming automatically. "Grandma was overwhelmed after your father died. Your uncle never knew how to talk about illness. They loved you even when they disappointed you." I closed my mouth. My daughter looked down at the tape around her 4. "Remember my school play?" I did. She had been 8. Mom had promised to attend, then called an hour before the performance to say she was too tired to drive in the rain. My daughter had stood behind the curtain in cardboard wings, looking past me toward the empty space beside my seat. I had told her grandma's headaches became worse in bad weather. "I remember," I said. "You said she wanted to come." "She told me she did. But she didn't." "No. And Uncle said he forgot my birthday. Because work was crazy." "Yes. You said that didn't mean he didn't care." I felt each answer removing another layer from the story I had built. "I did." "Did you know I was right?" "Right about what?" "That they didn't want to come." I wanted to say I could not know what they wanted. I wanted to protect her from the certainty that someone could love her and still repeatedly choose something easier. But she was no longer asking me to protect her from them. She was asking whether she could trust herself. "I knew they chose not to come," I said. Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. "Then why did you always make it sound different?" "I thought if I explained it, it would hurt less." "It didn't. I know that now." "No, you don't." The words came quickly this time. "You made me feel mean." I stopped breathing for a second. She continued before I could answer. "When I said Grandma didn't want to see me, you said I was being unfair. When I said Uncle only came when people were watching, you said he was busy. Every time I got mad, you told me what they really meant." "I'm sorry." She turned her face away. "I don't know what's true when you do that." The monitor changed rhythm as her breathing quickened. I reached for the call button, but she shook her head. "I'm okay. You don't have to be." Her mouth trembled. "That's what you always say after telling me I'm wrong." The sentence landed with more force than anything my mother or brother had said that day. I lowered my hand. For years, I had believed I was standing between my daughter and rejection. I had not noticed that I was also standing between her and the evidence of her own life. "I was wrong," I said. She did not look at me. "I wrote that nomination because I wanted to believe those good moments meant they would become the family I kept describing to you." "Did you believe it?" "At the time, yes." Her eyes moved back to mine. "Or did you need me to believe it?" I had no prepared answer. The question reached past the award, past the hospital, past every excuse I had ever placed between her and an empty doorway. "I needed both of us to believe it," I said. She pressed her lips together. The silence that followed was not the silence from that morning. That one had been a space where I refused to invent an excuse. This one was the consequence of all the excuses that had come before. My phone vibrated again. Neither of us looked at it. After a while I said, "I'm going to fix the nomination." She shook her head. "This isn't only about the nomination." "I know. You keep saying that." She turned carefully onto her side, facing away from me. I remained in the chair. I wanted to promise that I would never hurt her that way again. I wanted to say I understood everything now. Both statements would have been larger than the truth, and I had already done enough damage with large statements. So I waited. Near the end of the hour, she spoke without turning around. "Mom? I'm here. Don't tell me what they mean anymore." I looked at the back of her head, at the loose strands of hair against the pillow. "All right. Tell me what they did." My throat tightened. "All right. And let me decide what it means." I nodded, even though she could not see me. "I will." The phone vibrated once more inside my bag. This time, I did not reach for it. For the first time since the award email arrived, stopping the ceremony was no longer the hardest thing in front of me. The hardest thing was earning back the right to be believed. By the time my daughter woke again, the light outside the window had begun to fade. She had slept for almost an hour after the conversation with my brother. I had stayed in the chair beside her bed without opening the family chat, answering the foundation, or rehearsing what I would say next. For once, I let silence remain silence. When she opened her eyes, she looked first at the monitor, then at the window, then at me. "You're still here," she said. "I'm still here." Her voice was rough. I helped her take a small sip of water, then adjusted the straw when her hand trembled. She watched me place the cup back on the table. I wanted to apologize carefully. I wanted to choose words so accurate that they could not hurt her again. Instead, I began with the sentence I should have known not to use. I only wanted to protect you. Her eyes lowered. The change in her face was small, but I saw it. I had placed my intention between us again, as if what I meant could correct what she had experienced. I know, she said. The words held no comfort. I folded my hands in my lap. What I mean is, I thought if I gave you reasons for why they did things, you would not feel rejected. You already said that. I did. You keep explaining why you explained. I looked down at my fingers. She was too tired for a long argument, yet I had already made her carry another one. You're right, I said. Her brow tightened slightly, as if even agreement could be another way of ending the conversation before she was finished. I waited. After a while, she said, At the play, I kept looking for Grandma. I nodded. You told me she wanted to be there. She told me she did, but I didn't ask what she wanted. My throat tightened. You asked why she wasn't there. And on my birthday, when Uncle forgot, you said work was hard for him. Yes. I was the one crying. Why did we talk about how hard it was for him? There was no accusation in the way she asked it. She sounded genuinely confused, as if she had found a rule in our family that no longer made sense. I had taught her that, when someone hurt her, the first duty was to understand the person who caused it. I don't know, I said, then stopped myself. That was not true. I was afraid that if I let you call it what it was, you would stop believing they loved you. She stared at the blanket. Did you think I would stop loving them? Maybe. Would that have been bad? The question frightened me, because I had never allowed myself to ask it. I thought losing them would hurt you. She touched the edge of the tape on her hand. Pretending didn't make them come. No. It just made me feel bad for being mad. I know. She looked at me. Do you? I could have defended myself. I could have said I was learning. I could have reminded her that I had been alone after her father died, that I had been trying to hold together a family with whatever pieces remained. All of that was true. None of it belonged in the answer she needed. I know I made you doubt yourself, I said. I know that when you told me what their choices felt like, I kept replacing your answer with mine. Her eyes filled again, but she blinked the tears back. I thought maybe I was mean. You weren't. You said I was being unfair. I was wrong. The words hurt because they were not enough. She turned her face toward the window. Outside, the last daylight reflected against the glass, faintly showing both of us. I could see how close my chair was to the bed and how much distance still remained. My phone rested inside my bag. The photograph was still in the family chat. So were Mom's words. So was my brother's reply. So was my daughter's question, though she had spoken that aloud rather than typed it. The foundation had not asked to see any of those things yet, but I knew how easily they could become evidence. One screenshot could prove that the family description was false. One forwarded message could end every argument about whether I was overreacting. One screenshot could also place my daughter's most painful moment in a file reviewed by strangers. I leaned forward, keeping my voice quiet. The foundation may ask me to explain why I won't confirm the introduction. She did not turn back. They might ask for the messages. Now she looked at me. Why? Because the messages show what happened today. Her expression changed immediately. Would everyone see them? I don't know. They might stay inside the review, but people I don't know could read them. Her hand moved toward the phone on the shelf, then stopped. Would they read what I said too? I knew which words she meant. Did I ask for too much? They could, if I told them. She pressed her lips together. I don't want that. All right. I don't want people at the ceremony knowing I asked that. They won't. And I don't want them feeling sorry for me. I understand. She shook her head. No, don't say you understand if you don't. The correction was quiet, but it was deserved. I won't share it, I said. Your photograph, the messages, and what you said in this room stay private. What if that means they still get the award? The question surprised me. I searched her face for what she wanted me to say. This time, I refused to invent it. How would you feel about that? She thought for several seconds. I don't know. That's okay. I don't care about the trophy. Her eyes drifted toward the ceiling. I just don't want them using me to sound good. They won't use you. And I don't want you showing everyone that they were mean, so you can prove you were right. The words cut cleanly because they named something I had not wanted to see. If I sent the chat, I would not only be protecting her. Part of me would be protecting myself. I would be showing the foundation that I had a reason to change my mind. I would be turning her wound into my defense. I won't do that, I said. She watched me for a moment. Promise? I promise. She settled back against the pillow. The promise did not restore what had broken between us. It did not make her reach for my hand or tell me she forgave me, but her shoulders lowered slightly. That was enough for the moment. A nurse came in to check her blood pressure and help her change position. My daughter winced when she moved, then asked for the lights to be dimmed. I waited until the nurse left and her eyes closed again before opening my email. A new message from the program manager was waiting. The review committee has asked whether you have documentation supporting your requested changes. You are not required to provide private medical or personal communications. Please indicate whether supporting material will be submitted. I read it once. The answer was inside my phone. I could have attached the screenshot in less than a minute. Instead, I typed that I would not provide private communications involving a minor. I confirmed that my requested changes were based on my own inability to verify the family claims. Before sending, I read the sentence aloud in my head. My own inability to verify. It placed the responsibility where it belonged. I pressed send. The reply came several minutes later. The program manager confirmed that the messages were not required. The review could proceed based on my statement, though the foundation might be unable to explain the dispute publicly or resolve it before the ceremony. There was no promise that the award would stop. No assurance that anyone would believe me. I had given up the clearest proof I possessed. For the first time that day, losing an advantage felt like the right decision. My daughter stirred. Did you send them? No. Her eyes remained closed. Okay. The word was small, but it was the first thing she had accepted from me without checking for another meaning. I placed the phone face down on the table. At 6:48, it vibrated once. A message from my brother appeared on the locked screen. We know you still haven't confirmed the revision. Mom and I have one final solution. Leave her out of it and let the rest stand. I did not open the message. The offer had arrived exactly as I expected. They were willing to remove my daughter from the story. They were not yet willing to remove the lie. I opened my brother's message after my daughter's breathing settled into a slow, even rhythm. We know you still haven't confirmed the revision. Mom and I have one final solution. Leave her out of it and let the rest stand. A second message followed. No photograph, no transplant, no medical details. We'll tell the foundation we support those changes. You confirm the family statement, and this ends tonight. For several seconds, I watched the word solution glow against the screen. It solved the problem they could see. My daughter would disappear from the program. The ceremony would continue. Their guests would remain seated. The engraved trophy would still be waiting beside the stage. The sentence about never turning away from their own would remain untouched. I set the phone down and looked at my daughter. She had asked me not to turn her pain into proof. I had promised. That meant I could not win this argument by showing the foundation what my family had written. But keeping her messages private did not require me to confirm a lie. My brother called once. I let it ring until it stopped, then carried the phone into the family alcove. The door remained open, and from where I stood, I could see the rise and fall of my daughter's blanket. I called him back. He answered immediately. Did you read it? Yes. Then you understand what we're offering. You're offering to remove her from the story. That is what you wanted. It was part of what I wanted. He released a breath that sounded more impatient than tired. The foundation has already deleted every medical reference. Her name is nowhere in the introduction. What else is there? The statement about the family. We have been through this. I know. Then stop moving the line. I leaned against the wall. I'm not moving it. I'm finally saying where it is. Mom's voice came through faintly before my brother could answer. He had placed me on speaker again. We agreed not to mention her, she said. That should be enough. You agreed not to use her. Mom went quiet. My brother spoke next. That is unfair. No. Using her would have been reading her illness in front of strangers so the family looked devoted. You agreed not to do that. I'm glad. But the revised introduction still says, you never turn your backs on your own. It is a general statement. It is a claim about how this family behaves. It is one line in an award program. Then, why do you need me to confirm it? Neither of them answered. Through the doorway, my daughter moved beneath the blanket. I lowered my voice. My brother said, because you are the person who nominated us. There was no uncertainty left in his tone. Mom drew in a quick breath. You wrote it? My brother must not have told her yet. I closed my eyes. Yes. The silence changed. Mom spoke carefully. You nominated us for this award 6 months ago, and now you are the one trying to stop it. I'm trying to correct what I wrote. Her voice became smaller. Why didn't you tell us? I wanted it to be a surprise. It certainly is. I accepted the words without defending myself. My brother stepped in before the conversation could turn toward my role for too long. She believed the nomination when she submitted it. That matters. People do not get to rewrite history every time they are upset. I'm not rewriting the dialysis rides or the meal schedule. Then, confirm the revision. I cannot confirm the last sentence. Mom sounded wounded now. After everything I have done for you, I pressed my hand against the wall. I am grateful for what you did. You don't sound grateful. Gratitude does not require me to say you have never turned away. One evening, she said. You are judging an entire family by one evening. I heard the same argument we had already exhausted, but this time I understood why it could never end. They believed love was the total of everything they had ever given. My daughter had experienced it one choice at a time. I'm not asking either of you to agree with me, I said. I'm telling you what I can no longer confirm. My brother's tone sharpened. Do you realize what happens if you refuse? People from my office are already at Civic Hall. Mom's pantry volunteers bought a table. The foundation printed programs. They built the entire presentation around tonight. I didn't build the presentation. You built the nomination. He was right. That was why the next decision belonged to me. I'll speak to the foundation, I said. You already have. I need to ask them what my options are. You have one reasonable option. Confirm the revised language. Mom spoke before I ended the call. If you do this, do not pretend it has nothing to do with anger. I am angry. At least you admit it. But anger is not what makes the sentence false. I disconnected before either of them could answer. When I returned to the room, my daughter was awake. She looked toward the phone in my hand. Was that their solution? Yes. What was it? I sat beside her. They agreed that your name, photograph, transplant, and messages would stay out of the ceremony. Her shoulders loosened slightly. But they want me to confirm the rest of the introduction. The part saying they're a good family? The part saying they never turn away from their own. She stared at the ceiling. What happens if you don't? I don't know yet. She turned her head toward me. Would they lose the trophy? I haven't decided anything based on what they might lose. I chose my next words carefully. I'm going to ask what my responsibility is, as the person who wrote the nomination. She was quiet for a moment. I don't care about their trophy, she said. There was no triumph in her voice. I know. I don't want them to lose it because of me. This is not your decision to carry. Her eyes searched mine, perhaps checking whether I meant it. I wrote the nomination, I continued. I made claims about them. Deciding whether I can still stand behind those claims is my responsibility. She looked away again. I just want you to stop saying something happened when it didn't. The simplicity of the sentence stripped away every remaining excuse. I will. I called the program manager from the chair beside the bed. My daughter closed her eyes but did not ask me to leave. The manager answered on the second ring. I received the revised introduction, I said. The family has agreed to remove all references to my daughter. Yes, we documented their consent to those changes. But I still cannot confirm the final family statement. The manager paused. Then, I need to explain where the file stands. I waited. The community service claims remain verified. The concern is that this award category is not based on volunteer activity alone. Your nomination connected those activities to the family's private conduct. The committee cannot replace your first-hand attestation with the recipient's own statement on the day of presentation. What happens if I do not confirm it? We can continue the review later, but we cannot complete the presentation tonight. My hand tightened around the phone. You mean the introduction changes again? I mean the award cannot be presented from this nomination tonight. The answer was quieter than I had imagined. No threat, no dramatic promise. Just a consequence built into the words I had written. Would you announce why? No personal information would be disclosed. The presenter would be told that the category requires additional review. And my daughter's messages? We do not have them, and we will not refer to them. I looked at my daughter. Her eyes remained closed, but I knew she was listening. The manager continued. If you confirm the revised statement, the presentation proceeds. If you cannot confirm it, you may withhold attestation or formally withdraw your support for the nomination. What is the difference? Withholding attestation leaves the file unresolved. Formal withdrawal states that you no longer stand behind the nomination as an accurate representation of the family. The words settled over me. One option delayed a decision. The other accepted responsibility for it. When do you need my answer? Before the category begins. The current schedule places it shortly after 9. I thanked her and ended the call. For several minutes, neither my daughter nor I spoke. Outside the window, the glass reflected the room more clearly now than the darkening sky. I saw my daughter's bed, my chair, the monitor, and the phone in my hand. 6 months earlier, I had written that my family never turned away. That morning, they had answered my daughter's photograph with an excuse. That afternoon, I had tried to rescue the nomination without admitting why it needed rescuing. Now there was no sentence left to edit. Only my name beneath it. My daughter opened her eyes. What are you going to do? I could have told her I was doing it for her. That would have placed the weight back in her hands. I'm going to take responsibility for what I wrote, I said. I opened the final attestation form. 2 choices appeared beneath the revised copy. Confier nomination. Withdraw nominator support. My finger hovered only once. Then I selected the second option. A warning appeared asking whether I understood that the award could not be presented from the current nomination that evening. I selected yes. The final box asked for a short statement. I typed that the documented acts of community service were real, but I had expanded separate acts of help into a claim about the family's consistent private conduct. I could no longer verify that claim and would not ask the foundation to present it as fact. I did not mention the photograph. I did not mention the messages. I did not mention the question my daughter had asked. I read the statement once, then pressed submit. The screen displayed a confirmation number. My daughter watched my face. Is it done? Yes. Are they going to lose it? The foundation cannot give them the award from my nomination tonight. She absorbed that without smiling. Then she asked, Did you tell them what Grandma said? No. What Uncle said? No. What I said? No. Her eyes remained on mine. What did you tell them? The truth about my part. She waited. I told them I wrote something I could no longer stand behind. My daughter turned her face toward the window. This time, the silence between us did not feel empty. It felt like a boundary neither of us had to explain. The confirmation number remained on my screen for less than a minute. before a second message appeared beneath it. Submission received. Identity verification required before withdrawal can be processed. I read the sentence twice. The choice had been made, but it was not yet final. My daughter watched me from the bed. What happened? They have to confirm it was really me. Do you have to show them the messages? No. I said it without hesitation. She nodded and let her eyes close again. At 7:36, the program manager called through the Foundation's verified number. I answered from the chair beside the bed and kept my voice low. She asked me to confirm my full name, the nomination reference number, and the email address used 6 months earlier. Then she sent a 6-digit code to that address and waited while I read it back. The process took less than 2 minutes. It felt longer because I understood what each answer was doing. My name, my submission, my responsibility. When the verification was complete, the program manager asked whether I still wished to withdraw my support for the nomination. Yes. Before I process that, I need to confirm the scope of your statement. Are you claiming the documented volunteer activities did not occur? No, they occurred. Are you disputing your mother's work with the church pantry? No. Your brother's charity drives? No. The meal support and the 2 scheduled dialysis rides described in the original submission? No. Those happened too. She paused. What are you withdrawing? I looked at my daughter. She had turned her face toward the window, but I could tell from the stillness of her hands that she was awake. I'm withdrawing the conclusion I built from those events, I said. I described separate acts of help as proof of how the family consistently treated one another. I can no longer verify that. The program manager typed for several seconds. Would you like to submit documentation supporting your change? No. Private communications are not required, but the committee may ask whether there is a factual basis for the withdrawal. The factual basis is that I wrote more than the facts could support. Another pause. You understand that without supporting materials, the Foundation will not make a public finding about the family's conduct. Yes. You understand that the recipients may say the withdrawal was personal or retaliatory. Yes. You understand that the category may be suspended tonight, without any public explanation beyond additional review. Yes. Each answer removed another version of the outcome in which everyone knew I was right. The Foundation would not read the family chat. The audience would not hear what Mom had written. No one would know that my daughter had asked whether she wanted too much. My family might leave Civic Hall telling everyone that I had ruined the evening because I was angry. I would not use my daughter to correct them. The program manager asked me to restate the withdrawal in my own words for the recorded file. I took a breath. I nominated my family because several acts of support made me believe they would always be present when one of us needed them. Those acts were real. The promise I built from them was mine. I no longer stand behind the nomination as an accurate description of the family's consistent private conduct. My daughter's fingers loosened against the blanket. The manager repeated the statement back to me. I confirmed it. Your withdrawal is now authenticated, she said. The file will be marked unsupported by the original nominator. What happens next? The review chair has been notified. The current nomination cannot be completed tonight. The words were almost identical to what she had told me earlier, but now they no longer described a possible consequence. They described what I had done. Will the presenter know before the category begins? We are trying to stop the segment before the introduction starts. The printed program cannot be changed, and the production script has already been distributed. The review chair will communicate directly with the stage manager. What if the introduction has already started? The presenter will be instructed to stop. My eyes moved to the time. 7:48. More than an hour remained before the category, yet the evening suddenly felt as if it had already begun. The manager asked whether I still intended to join the private video feed as the original nominator. I had forgotten about it. 6 months earlier, I had agreed to deliver a short surprise introduction from home. After the transplant was scheduled, the Foundation arranged for me to join from the hospital instead. The access link had remained active even after I requested the revisions. Do I need to appear? I asked. No, Your speaking segment has been removed. Can I still watch? Yes. The feed is private and delayed by only a few seconds. But you are not required to. I looked at my daughter. I'll decide later. After the call ended, I placed the phone on the table. My daughter opened her eyes. It's final? Yes. She studied my face. Are you scared? The honest answer came before I could soften it. Yes. Because they're going to be mad? That's part of it. What's the other part? I looked down at my hands. Because I wrote it. I want to blame them for everything that happens tonight, but they didn't put my name on the nomination. I did. She was quiet. Then she said, "You changed it." I withdrew it. That's what I mean. I did not tell her that changing one decision did not erase the first one. She was not offering forgiveness. She was stating a fact. For the moment, I let it remain one. At 8:12, a voicemail arrived from Mom. I did not play it on speaker. I put in one earbud and listened while my daughter rested. Mom's voice was controlled at first. She said there was still time to repair the situation. She said the pantry volunteers had spent money on the table. She said my brother's co-workers were already taking photographs beneath the foundation banner. Then her voice wavered. "We agreed to leave her out of it," she said. "We agreed to call tomorrow morning and come when the hospital permits visitors. I don't understand why that wasn't enough." I stopped the recording. They had offered tomorrow, only after tonight was threatened. That did not make the offer meaningless. It did change what it meant. A text from my brother followed. "Confirm the revision, and we will put this behind us. No one needs to know you caused the review." I read it once, then muted the family chat. I did not answer. At 8:25, a nurse came in to help my daughter sit at the edge of the bed. The first attempt lasted less than a minute. Her face tightened, and sweat appeared along her hairline. "We can stop," the nurse said. My daughter nodded. Together, we helped her lie back. The nurse checked the incision area, adjusted the blanket, and reminded her that recovery did not become less real because she needed rest. After she left, my daughter stared at the ceiling. "Can you turn on the ceremony? You don't have to watch." "I don't want to." "Then I won't." She turned her head toward me. "You can. Are you sure?" "I want to sleep. You're going to wonder what happened if you don't see it." Her voice held no accusation. She knew me well enough to understand that uncertainty would keep me reaching for the phone. "I'll use headphones," I said. "And don't wake me if they yell. They won't be able to call through." I muted them. She settled into the pillow. At 8:46, I opened the private link. The feed showed the ballroom from a fixed camera near the side of the stage. Round tables filled the room beneath warm ceiling lights. A blue backdrop carried the foundation's name. On a narrow pedestal beside the lectern sat the award. Even through the small screen, I recognized Mom's silver dress near the front table. My brother stood beside her in a dark suit, smiling at someone outside the camera frame. They looked ready. For a moment, I saw them as the people I had described 6 months earlier. Mom, who had driven through winter traffic to take my daughter to dialysis. My brother, who had created order when my life had begun to collapse. The image did not become false because another image existed. It became incomplete. At 8:58, the presenter returned to the lectern and announced that the next recognition would begin shortly. A message appeared beneath the video. "Withdrawal authenticated. Stage manager notified." My daughter slept beside me, one hand open on the blanket. I lowered the volume. The presenter glanced down at the printed script. Across the ballroom, Mom straightened in her seat. My brother buttoned his jacket. The category title appeared on the screen behind the stage. Family of the Year. Then the presenter lifted the first page of the introduction. The presenter smiled toward the front tables. This year's Family of the Year recognition honors a household whose service to Riverton reflects the way its members care for one another. My brother leaned slightly toward Mom. She reached for his hand beneath the table. The presenter read about the pantry first. He described the winter food drives, the shelves restocked before holidays, and the families who received groceries without having to explain why they needed them. Those facts were real. Mom had spent years doing that work. She had carried boxes until her wrists hurt and stayed late when volunteers failed to arrive. The audience applauded. My daughter slept through the sound in my headphones. The presenter moved to my brother's charity drives. He praised his ability to organize people, raise donations, and turn offers of help into practical support. Those facts were real too. My brother stood a little straighter. On the pedestal beside the lectern, the award caught the stage lights. It was smaller than I had imagined, a clear glass shape mounted on a dark base. I had expected the moment to feel satisfying. Instead, I felt exposed. Every sentence came from something I had written late at night while my daughter slept on the couch. The foundation had shortened the language and polished the transitions, but I could still hear my own need beneath it. I had wanted separate moments to become a pattern. I had wanted help to become permanence. The presenter turned the page. My phone displayed another message beneath the feed. Stage manager has received final instruction. The presenter glanced toward the side of the stage, but no one stopped him. He continued, "What distinguishes this family is not only what they have given to the community, but the devotion they have shown within their own home." Mom lifted her chin. My brother's smile returned. I looked toward my daughter. Her face was turned toward me now, though her eyes remained closed. The monitor beside her kept its even rhythm. The presenter looked down at the printed script. Through illness, loss, and uncertainty, they have demonstrated that when one member faces hardship, this is a family that always... A woman stepped into view at the edge of the stage. She did not approach the microphone. She raised one hand toward the presenter and pointed to the monitor built into the lectern. He stopped. The unfinished word remained in the room. My brother's smile disappeared. The presenter lowered his eyes to the screen. Whatever message appeared there was too small for the camera to show. For 2 seconds, nothing moved. Then he placed the page flat on the lectern. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we need to pause this recognition while additional review is completed." A low sound moved through the ballroom, but the feed did not linger on the audience. The presenter turned toward the pedestal. He lifted the glass award with both hands, carried it behind the lectern, and set it on a lower table beside the stage manager. The award had not been thrown away. No one had broken it. It was simply no longer being given. The presenter returned to the microphone. "We apologize for the interruption. The Foundation will continue with the next scheduled portion of this evening's program." The camera remained fixed. I could see Mom's profile near the front table. She had not turned toward the people around her. She stared at the place where the award had been. My brother looked down at his phone. A notification appeared on mine almost immediately. My family chat had become active again. I did not open it. Another call came through, but the muted setting prevented it from interrupting the feed. My brother's name appeared briefly at the top of the screen and vanished. The ceremony moved on. A youth music group entered from the side of the ballroom. Chairs shifted. The presenter welcomed them as if the previous 3 minutes had not occurred. The world had not stopped because my family's award did. I closed the private feed. The room returned to the softer sounds of the hospital. Ventilation hummed above us. A cart rolled past in the corridor. My daughter's fingers moved against the blanket. Her eyes opened. "Is it over?" "The category is..." She watched my face. "What happened?" "They stopped before they gave them the award." "Did everyone see?" "They saw the presenter stop." "Did they tell everyone why?" "No." Her gaze moved toward the phone. "Did they show the messages?" "No." "Did they say anything about me?" "No." She studied me for a moment, still uncertain. "What did you tell them?" I pulled the chair closer to the bed. "I told them I wrote the nomination." She waited. "I told them the pantry work was real. The charity drives were real. The meals and dialysis rides were real." Her expression tightened slightly. "And then?" "I told them I had turned those things into a statement I couldn't prove." "What statement?" "That they always showed up. That they never turned away from their own." She looked toward the dark window. Did you tell them what Grandma wrote? No. What Uncle wrote? No. What I asked? No. Her shoulders lowered. I continued before I could be tempted to explain more. I only told them what I had written and what I could no longer stand behind. She was quiet. My phone vibrated on the table. Mom's name appeared first. Then, my brother's. I turned the screen face down. My daughter noticed. Are you going to answer? Not in here. Are they mad? I think they probably are. She turned back toward me. That question would once have opened a doorway for every habit I had spent the day confronting. I might have said Mom was embarrassed, not angry. I might have said my brother cared too much about his coworkers' opinions. I might have explained that they had been surprised, that the public setting had made everything worse, that people sometimes said cruel things when they felt cornered. I did none of that. I haven't heard what they have to say yet, I said, so I don't know. She nodded slowly. A new voicemail notification appeared. I ignored it. What happens to the trophy? She asked. I don't know. The foundation may review everything later. Could they still get it? Maybe. But not from the nomination I wrote tonight. She considered that. I didn't want them to lose it because of me. They didn't. Her eyes narrowed slightly, making sure I was not protecting her with another false answer. I withdrew what I wrote, I said. That was my decision. They made their decisions. You did not cause either one. She looked down at her hand. I sent the picture. Yes. Would this have happened if I didn't? The question hurt because the factual answer was uncertain. Maybe I would have confirmed the introduction if the morning had passed, without those messages. Maybe my family would have received the award, and I would have watched from a hospital room while telling myself the public description was close enough to the truth. But causation was not blame. The picture showed me something I had been avoiding, I said. That does not make what happened your fault. She touched the blanket where the phone had rested earlier. I just wanted them to be happy I was okay. I know. Was that too much? No. The answer came without hesitation. She looked directly at me. It wasn't too much to ask for a call. It wasn't too much to want them here. And it wasn't wrong to feel hurt when they chose something else. Her eyes filled. This time, I did not reach for a reason that would make the choice sound kinder. I held out my hand, but left the space between us for her to decide. After several seconds, she placed 2 fingers against mine. Not her whole hand. Not forgiveness. A beginning. My phone vibrated again. I left it face down. The award ceremony had stopped because I withdrew my words. But the change that mattered most was quieter. My daughter had asked what happened, and for the first time, I had answered without telling her what anyone else meant. The foundation's email arrived at 7:14 the next morning. The Family of the Year award had not been presented. The nomination remained under review, and no new decision would be made until the review process was complete. That was all. There was no description of the ballroom, no mention of my family's reaction, and no request for my daughter's messages. The award had stopped because the nomination no longer had the testimony required to support it. My daughter was awake when I read the email, but I did not hand her the phone. They confirmed it wasn't given, I said. She looked toward me from the raised hospital bed. Are they going to try again? The foundation is reviewing it. She nodded and returned her attention to the cup in her hands. She had been working on 3 small sips for almost 5 minutes. I did not tell her the review would probably end the nomination. I did not know that yet. A nurse entered with the morning medications and checked the chart beside the bed. My daughter swallowed each pill slowly, making a face after the last one. Still tastes terrible, she said. I believe you. You haven't tasted it. No. That's why I said I believe you. She glanced at me, then lowered her eyes to the blanket. It was not forgiveness. It was only a moment when I did not correct what she knew. The family chat remained muted through the morning. At 11, a voicemail from Mom appeared. A message from my brother arrived beneath it, asking me to listen before responding. I waited until my daughter was resting. Mom spoke first in the recording. Her voice sounded strained but controlled. She said I had taken years of help and erased them because of one painful evening. She said the pantry volunteers believed she was being honored for work she had actually done. She said my brother had helped us when no one else knew how overwhelmed I was. Then my brother took the phone. He said I had confused disappointment with betrayal. He said families survived imperfect moments by remembering the good ones. He said my decision had humiliated them in front of coworkers, volunteers, and friends. Near the end, Mom spoke again. Whatever you think you protected her from, you have made sure she has less family now. The recording ended. I sat with the phone in my hand. That sentence found the fear I had carried since my husband died. Less family. It was the fear that had made me turn missed visits into misunderstandings. It had made me treat every small act of help as evidence of a permanent bond. It had made me believe that keeping the word family intact mattered more than asking what existed beneath it. I played the voicemail once more, to make sure I had heard it accurately. Then I replied in the group chat. I wrote that Mom's dialysis rides were real. My brother's meal train was real. Their volunteer work was real. Withdrawing the nomination did not erase any of it. I also wrote that past help did not purchase freedom from responsibility for present choices. My daughter's future relationship with them would not be decided by a title, an award, or my explanations. It would depend on what they said and did directly, and whether those actions became consistent over time. I ended with one boundary. Any future contact about my daughter had to be about her, not the ceremony, the nomination, or the embarrassment they felt. I pressed send. My brother began typing almost immediately. I closed the chat before his answer appeared. That was the only response I gave. Over the next few days, my daughter's body demanded more attention than the family dispute. Blood draws came before breakfast. Medication times divided the day into precise sections. Nurses measured what she drank and recorded what her body released. The transplant team changed one dosage, then changed it again. She remained in the hospital. Some mornings, she looked stronger. By afternoon, she would be exhausted from sitting upright. On the third day after the ceremony, the foundation sent its final notice. The nomination had been closed because the original attestation had not been restored. The documented volunteer activities would remain in the foundation's records, but the Family of the Year recognition would not be awarded from that submission. There would be no second ceremony, no replacement introduction, no public explanation. I read the message alone and archived it. My daughter did not ask about the trophy again. That afternoon, the nurse said she could attempt another supervised walk in the corridor. My daughter stared at the floor beside the bed. How far? As far as your body says, the nurse replied. That's not a number. The nurse smiled. Then we'll let you choose the number. We helped her sit up slowly. She waited until the dizziness passed, then placed both feet on the floor. I stood on one side while the nurse managed the IV pole on the other. My daughter took her first step, then another. Her hospital socks made almost no sound against the floor. At the doorway, she stopped to breathe. We can go back, I said. She looked down the corridor. Not yet. We moved forward at her pace. A family passed us near the nurse's station. A little boy in a robe held his father's hand while dragging a toy truck behind him. Someone laughed inside another room. A meal cart waited near the wall. Nothing in the corridor knew what had happened at Civic Hall. My daughter completed 6 steps before stopping again. Mom? I'm here. Do you think Grandma loves me? The old answer rose instantly. Of course she does. She just has trouble showing it. She thought you were safe with me. I let every sentence pass without speaking. I don't know exactly what she feels, I said. My daughter looked at me. I continued carefully. I know she received your photograph. Her fingers tightened around my hand. I know she chose not to call you that day. She lowered her eyes. Does that mean she doesn't love me? I don't know what it means about what she feels. I waited until she looked at me again. But you are allowed to be hurt by what she did. She took another step. Do you think they'll ever come? I don't know. Even Uncle? Even Uncle. Her mouth tightened. I could see that uncertainty hurt, but I would not replace it with another promise they had not made. If they do come, I said, you get to decide whether you want to see them. What if I don't know? Then you don't have to decide yet. And if they say sorry? You can listen without forgiving right away. The nurse stayed a few steps behind us, close enough to help, but far enough to leave the conversation alone. My daughter moved forward again. After several steps, she asked, was I asking too much? I knew she was no longer asking only about the photograph. No. She waited. You were not asking too much when you wanted them to call, I said. You were not asking too much when you wanted them at the hospital. You were asking to know that you mattered to them. Her eyes filled, but she kept walking. You did matter, I said. Their choice did not prove that you asked for too much. She stopped. For 1 second, I thought I had added another interpretation she had not asked for. Then she said, I'm tired. We can turn back. She looked toward the room behind us, then toward the end of the corridor. One more light. A square ceiling light glowed several steps ahead. All right, I said. We walked toward it. I did not pull her forward or tell her she was stronger than she felt. When her steps shortened, mine shortened too. At the light, she stopped and turned around. The return took longer. Halfway back, she leaned more heavily against my arm. I adjusted without lifting her. When she paused, we paused. No one chose the distance for her. No one explained what her body should be able to do. When we reached her room, she sat carefully on the edge of the bed and let the nurse help her lie down. I pulled the blanket over her legs. She closed her eyes, then opened them again. Tomorrow, maybe 2 lights. Maybe. You're supposed to say I can do it. I looked at her. You can decide tomorrow. A faint smile appeared before she turned onto her side. I sat beside the bed while the nurse rolled the IV pole back into place. My phone remained silent inside my bag. For once, I did not need to fill that silence with a promise about who might call next. I stayed with what had happened. Then I waited for my daughter to choose the next step.